Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duval, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who'd better keep his distance from these creaking floorboards.
Tim Longo.
I entirely forgot to put the intro in my notes here, so I had to just wing that.
Oh, wow. Okay, good job.
I'm getting good at it. It's the 404th episode, so,
That was a cool moment.
Yes, it was. There's a lot of cool moments in this game. We are starting a new game. Folks in the Discord actually had the chance to find out what it is. I previewed it there today. We are now off of the site formerly known as
it is. Altogether. It's October 1st where we are
October
recording.
1st. So we are, we're all done there. Now the place to find us is in the Discord. There'll be a link in the show notes. We'll talk about it later. Let us turn to our next game series. We just finished off that series on Heroes of Might and Magic, which we gave probably not enough time to, but also we could tell that the time it would need was probably nearly bottomless. So we've decided to go instead with our annual spooky game to be something a little shorter, sweeter, well, spookier anyway. Sweeter like the candy of the treats of Halloween. But yeah, you want to go? Let's have you intro the game. It was your choice, and maybe you could talk a little bit about why.
Yes, Fatal Frame 2001. You said
I did.
Yeah, Fatal Frame
2001 in Japan. I believe 2002 in North America.
Got it. Yeah, I'm looking at the stats here. You are correct. Yes. For PlayStation 2, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, we've played a lot of the usual suspects, of course, the Resident Evil, Silent Hills, etc. In fact, in Resident Evil's case, multiple.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a new thing per se, but it's, in the last 5-ish years or so, I feel like there's been a sort of uptick in photo mode games that are very, very much devoted, especially in the indie space, that are devoted to that mechanic. But not only that, photo modes in bigger games are more of a thing now and getting very refined and very polished and very cool. And I don't know. It's kind of like such a weird sub-trend, but also so special, I think, because it's not violence-based. It's, the player can be artistic with it if they want to. I don't know. There's just a lot of different facets to photo modes, and especially games that are focused on, there's Pokemon Snap, right? Another classic.
There's Umurangi Generation, which is an indie title of the last maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Something. What is time?
Yeah.
It's been difficult to keep track of when things happened. But yeah, in roughly that time frame, I feel like Toem might have had a little bit of photography in it. That wasn't that kind of the mechanic for that thing. So yeah, it's definitely a thing. I mean, our culture, since the advent of walking around with these phones with 20 billion megapixels in them, on us all the time, and the advent of apps that focus on it have really both democratized in terms of everybody's got a camera now, photography, but also in some ways minimized it, right? It's not special to take a photograph anymore. And when we were growing up, it was and this game references it, because of when it's set and everything, you had film, film was expensive to have developed. You didn't just take a million shots, and just delete the ones you don't like, because you had to go and get them printed. And there were only, 24 shots on a roll typically. So the culture around photography has really changed. But, I think it's positive that everybody can do it, but also because it's so easy, it's nobody really makes that much of an effort, because you just take a billion photos and just keep the ones you like, which is also fine. It's not a judgment. But it's just a different, the the framing, as it were, is actually different around photos these days.
Yeah, the stakes have changed. Yeah,
Which,
and I mean,
to tie it back to games, my point, the reason why I brought that up is that having games that focus on photography as an element, I think actually kind of elevates the craft of the photo taking. I think photos do the same thing.
Combining it with gameplay, with mechanics and systems and such, and even combat.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we dabbled a little bit with it on Beyond Good and Evil, right?
Yeah.
Because it was even integrated into the economy of that game too. So, and collectability of it. So anyway, it was just on my mind, and I think we've played, like I already said, we've played so many of the usual suspects for the October timeframe of Halloween, etc., that spookiness, that I was also had always personally thought of Fatal Frame as probably a different conversation to have. There's going to be similar things that we'll talk about because it's still in the sort of survival horror genre. But, I'm not saying once you play one Resident Evil, you've played them all, but once you play the first one and the fourth one, you've probably played them all. Well, 7 and 8, bring some new stuff into it, but
first person.
I think we did maybe a bonus episode for that, but I really enjoyed both of those a lot, 7 and 8. But again, it wasn't like fundamentally there. I'm just always looking for. I know you've talked about Deadly Premonition as well.
Yep.
So
maybe next year. There's others too. So we may continue to find. We chose this one this year because, as I pointed out to Tim, that we never know when the PS3 store is going to go away. They tried once already. They've made it more of a pain to work with because now you have to put funds in your wallet beforehand and all this stuff. There are shenanigans, and you never know. So we figured better put this one first because Deadly Premonition's playable on PC, so it'll be playable forever in theory.
Oh, I have a perfect one for the horror genre that we need to play someday. It's called Minecraft.
Oh boy,
that game is scary as hell at night, and it becomes a horror game in my opinion. So
interesting.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a big matzo.
That's its own thing, right? That game is old enough now where it's. I think it would be appropriate to play and talk about, and we should because it obviously is super. But anyway, Fatal Frame.
Yes, let's. You mentioned 2001 already, so I know I did the research on this time. I will tackle it. It's not too bad to do if you just go back and look at like
Halo.
The most recent game we played from 2001 was Halo, but we have also played Animal Crossing, Grand Theft Auto 3, Devil May Cry, Civ 3, Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, Eco, and Silent Hill 2, which I think came out. That was the one that I was referring to earlier, where it's like I didn't go back and check the dates. I think Silent Hill 2 might have come out like very late 2001 here, but early 2001 in Japan, or even in 2000 in Japan. We were not super rigorous about that. And I think that Silent Hill 2 was maybe the second horror. Yeah, it was the second horror game we've ever done on our spooky games, because the first one was the first Resident Evil. So, so that tracks. Other games that came out this year. I'll run through a whole bunch. We probably have talked more about these games in the past. I think I've added in some here that maybe don't always talk about because they connect to other games we played. But Final Fantasy X, Gran Turismo 3, A-Spec. There's a A-Spec rather. That's a racing game for you. That was an early PlayStation 2 title, a real tech demo. A full game, but technically very, very, very impressive. Metal Gear Solid 2 or II, Sons of Liberty. Myst 3 or III, Exile. SSX Tricky, Super Smash Brothers Melee, Advance Wars.
I like how you said Melee.
Yeah,
So
Melee.
with a little French.
Burnout. Gothic, which is I believe a German role-playing game. Black and White, which I think we've mentioned previously.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, Ghost Recon. Black and White, I actually read recently, is one of those games that's extremely difficult to get working on modern hardware for some reason. Ghost Recon, Jak and Daxter, Max Payne, another one we've actually talked about playing because of its got a remake on the way. Onimusha Warlords, which I mentioned here because it is another horror game that was a early, also maybe Tecmo.
Koei. Yeah.
Was it Koei?
Well, they merged, so I don't remember if it's
they merged after they merged after this point. I did check that, so that's coming later when we talk about Tecmo. Pikmin, Red Faction, and Serious Sam. So there's a bunch. It's hardware wise, it was the year of GameCube, Xbox, as you indicated with the Halo launch title, and the Game Boy Advance. So those are all. So for example, Advance Wars was like a very early Game Boy Advance game in the launch window, as we say. So that kind of sets it all in its time. We were in year 2, I guess, of the PlayStation 2. So
interesting. Yeah. So I mean, we probably talked about a lot of this when we played Halo, or the other games we played. But it's an interesting lineup that year.
It's one of those years that's in the conversation for best years of all time. Like 98 and 04 are pretty strong contenders. And 2001, certainly from this kind of generation of like our early years of development.
Yeah.
This is another one of those hot years where you're like, wow, this is a big year. Like, I mean, how many titles did I mention for us? Like 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, that we've played from this year. So it's a strong year, or maybe 8.
And of course, I mean, we're biased because we were kind of living through that,
right?
As adults, basically, and developers. But I will say, like, every other year or so, there's some rhetoric around the best year in video games ever or whatever.
Yeah.
And these epic whatever Spider-Man 2 or, I don't know why I'm just thinking of Sony games, but Horizon, whatever it is, came out.
Right.
But to be honest, like even in the modern era, last 10 years or so, there's still, like, if I think about us playing say we're doing this 20 years from now, which we won't be.
No.
I don't think those are games we would play for the podcast. They're impressive games, but I don't think there's much to talk about with them.
Or that once you've talked about one of them, you kind of talked about all of them because there's
exactly
this merging to the Uber game, right? These days of like, every game has this, every game has that, every game has progression, every game has streaming world, every game has
maybe there's
mission structures, and
one thing that they did differently, like whatever creature combat in Horizon, right? The robot combat is like a standout thing.
Yeah.
So there's aspects of it, but yeah, there's just, as far as like, I think the reason that 04 and 98 always come up is that there were real forks in the roads those years, right? Genres were defined those years. Franchises were created in those years, and that's why I bring up Horizon. It's like new franchise that really had a big impact. So
I mean, and the other thing I would say about that is that I look at this list, and a lot of these games I played more or less contemporaneously. I mean, not all of them. Some of them for the cast I hadn't played before, but a lot of these I did play in that year. Halo, Eco, Silent Hill 2. A little bit of GTA 3, Animal Crossing I played that year, Final Fantasy 10. I don't think I played Sons of Liberty that year. I played Tricky, SSS Tricky. I played Advance Wars. I played Black and White. I think we played some Ghost Recon. I can't recall. I played Jak and Daxter. I played Max Payne. Like, I played Pikmin. I played Serious Sam. I played. And back then you could do that. Like the one long game in that is Final Fantasy X, and the rest of them are sort of things that you can't fit in in most years, like 2 Ubisoft games and a Spider-Man 2 and whatever, because it's just they take forever, if you're gonna play them. And if you like that sort of thing, you'll just play a lot of that sort of thing, right? And you can only play so many.
The hidden message for me here that I think that I will make not so hidden is that, and we're way off, I guess, topic, but I'm here.
No, we're pre-topics. It's good.
We're pre-topics, yeah. That because of the production value and the scale and budgets of games these days, the risk is going to be always less. And so the difference, the uniqueness and innovation is going to be less as well. And so the games are going to blend together much more so because of how expensive and how long, like you said, they are to make and play. And, like you said, back then they were shorter, but also like made in a different way, et cetera, et cetera. And so the list you just uttered that you played even this year as a player, the variety there is astounding. Yeah. Now, what I will say, though, is my point heavily focuses almost exclusively on, essentially publisher games. Mm-hmm. Now, what I will say over the last 10 years is that when we look back at like landmark years, I think what we will mostly be talking about are indie games that really were trailblazers in some specific way. We'll look back at whatever 2020 and we'll say, oh my God, look at all these indie games that were not the big budget games doing the same thing as everyone else was doing. These were teams that were really pushing the envelope because they could. And I'll always bring up Valheim because
it's your thing. Yeah.
But it also technically is owned by a big company, but still indie in spirit. But yeah, then the true indie games out there. So anyway, our industry's weird. I don't know.
Yeah, it is.
And maybe a little broken, but
maybe. I can't imagine what would lead you to such a conclusion after the late 2023 and 2024 that we have had. So, those big bets and risks are starting to, the companies that own that these publishers are bigger parts of are kind of looking at the games units with a side eye now of like, you want how much money to do what? Which didn't used to be a thing, right? Because it was so below the radar, it was not an item that the CEO of, the big corporation needed to look at. And Nintendo has always charted a different path where they always make a profit on their hardware. They make their games with a different aesthetic and with different goals, and it's smaller and cheaper. And they seem to be doing okay with that. So,
and then the whole too big to fail, motif or theme or what have you, or mantra, I don't know, whatever
mentality.
Mentality. Yeah. That is actually, and it's always, it's never really been the, true. And there would always be a game a year or something that was like that enormous game that didn't actually achieve, that they thought was low risk and they put all this money in and it did fail. But I would say of the last couple years, maybe especially this year, those games that were super big and seemed like they couldn't fail are not meeting expectations. And so I think,
sometimes they're just being pulled off the shelves of stores entirely. So.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, whatever something's come home to roost. I don't know. It's like that whole, like, put all your eggs in one basket. There's no way it can fail because it's just so big. Let's slap a big IP on it, etc. Put all this equation of mitigating risk is also not actually working anymore.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see. And of course,
the games that have broken out have not been the big.
They're not big budgets. They're not big budgets. They're like these surprise, out of left field, often indie or at least not big budget, quadruple A published games. So it's like it's such a fascinating time, but also kind of, to be honest, because of what we do, our day jobs, it's also a terrifying time. So
Yeah. Well, now that
okay, there you go.
Now let's talk about. Now that we've been talking about the games industry, let's talk about survival horror. No connection there. Well, now let's first talk a little
true story.
Based on a true story. Let's first talk about Tecmo, and then Fatal Frame a little bit, and then we'll get into the topics. I'm not going to belabor any of this. As you alluded to earlier, Tecmo is now part of Koei, but at the time, it was not yet. It was still separate. They had not yet merged. It came a few years later, and at the time, it was best known for a few series: Dead or Alive, Ninja Gaiden, and whatever Team Ninja would do, which is, I guess, also Dead or Alive. And then if you went back a little ways, like Tecmo Bowl was a huge deal. I remember at the time. That was one that I was like, I even knew it. I was just like, what is Tecmo Bowl? And then somebody was like, oh, it's like arcadey football. So those are kind of things they were known for in the West. I went and looked at the list of Tecmo titles.
Don't they own Pac-Man? Romance of Three Kingdoms too.
Yes. Yeah. And then they had some other stuff, but some of it kind of bled together when Koei came. Yeah, I was trying to pick the ones that I thought were most well known. Was my guess was those series, but if Romance of the Three Kingdoms you think was bigger here than those, I don't know.
That franchise has been around forever, Anyway, and obviously everyone has their things that resonates with them. That's one for me that I picked up. Oh yeah, Itageki's studio, Team Ninja.
Yep.
I thought they owned Pac-Man, but I guess I'm thinking of something else.
No, I don't think they're Pac-Man. And then the bits about Fatal Frame, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. The whole series, I think, is directed by Makoto Shibata, who I think maybe mentioned pre-show. I don't know if you mentioned it here. It's a series. It's pretty highly regarded. And the second game, which we're not playing, but the second game is like in the running for the scariest game ever made.
Really?
Which is Crimson Butterfly. And I will totally, based on my reaction to this game so far, I will totally be playing Crimson Butterfly immediately following us finishing this game. So
the cover for this game, by the way, is something else.
I did not look up the cover.
Oh yeah, you should look it up.
This series, I did want to mention, this series got its kickoff apparently in the wake of the success of the Silent Hill games, which I think you can see a little bit of the DNA there for sure. I
was also reading something
construction.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I felt like I was playing a Silent Hill game pretty quickly too, but the other thing that I read someplace, I can't find it now, was The Ring's popularity, the movie.
Oh yeah, mm-hmm.
Because such a ghost story focused, horror versus Western gore and such,
right?
And I get very, very Ring vibes. The Ringu,
yeah.
Ringu.
I'm going to be watching that this month as well because it's on Criterion right now. There's a lot of good Halloween stuff from Criterion right now. So
we need to make our list. Jen wants to start.
Yeah.
That one I don't think we'll make it though. That's too scary.
I'm gonna rewatch Ju-On, which is The Grudge. Oh man, that movie.
That's rough too. Yeah, there's no.
It was super scary. Audition. Yeah. Don't make my phone ring at any time when it's night here over the next month, because especially the Japanese horror is going to be getting to me. Anyway. That's an aside. Another aside. Asides from the asides. But I think that's basically all I wanted to cover with more of the sort of context and all of that before we get to the game proper. But you already dropped it in there. Based on a true story? ?
So we found out, doing the little research we typically do, we found out that tagline, which is on the cover, by the way, that you should look at. The cover, I'm sure I will understand it at some point, but
are there a lot of hands?
No, there's a bunch of ghost heads, but there's one head. I guess it's decapitated or something, but it's upside down. It's a very weird composition. So Yeah, everybody look it up. Like it's not a cover where I'd look at it and I'd say, that's for me. I don't know. It's just such a weird. I'm not even sure. I'm trying to look upside down to see who the character is. I have a feeling we haven't even met the character that's on the cover yet. Or I haven't.
Probably.
But there's a lot of ghosts anyway, which is cool. But no, yeah. So I guess in the Japanese version they didn't have that tagline on there, but in the outside Japan they added based on a true story, which I didn't know. And so when I bought the game on PlayStation 3 store, I was like, "What are you talking about? That can't be a thing." So
when you start the game as well, it's on the title screen.
Yeah.
Well, or the main menu, I guess. When you're starting a new game and all that stuff.
Very cursory research on this. Shibata, he was asked about it a couple times. Initially, it seemed, and I'm predicting that when people asked him about it initially when it came out in Japan, it might have been a bit of a diversion for PR purposes, would be my guess, especially because later when he was asked about it, he had a different answer. But initially he was saying largely there is a mansion, the Himuro mansion in Japan, and there is some gruesome death stuff that happened there apparently many decades ago. He said it wasn't based on the stuff that happened there, and it was more based on Japanese urban legends and ghost stories, which is obvious once you start playing. But later he was interviewed and he did elaborate some because there was a mansion. I don't think it had the same name, of course, outside of Japan or outside of Tokyo, rather that 7 people were murdered, very, very grisly manner. There was actually some occult stuff related to it, like handprints in blood, like narrow staircases with like talismans ceiling, it's like a lot of stuff that you can see inspiration right away with what they're doing in the game. Bodies found with rope, and things like that. And then apparently like an old statue of a woman in a kimono with the head missing, which seems like a thing in this game. So some of this is really on point, but get this. There was also a rumor that if you took a photo of a certain window, a young girl can be seen if you develop the picture.
Ah, interesting.
So it's like, okay, well, that's on the nose,
Wow.
And apparently the incidents provoked fear, people of Tokyo, blah, blah, blah. And many believe that who lived near there were cursed. And those 7 people who died are still unexplained today, supposedly.
I kind of side-eye a lot of that stuff just generally. I mean, as a kid who grew up with the Amityville Horror, whatever, I kind of, or The Entity. I don't know if you saw The Entity, another one that's like, this is based on a true story. And when I hear those things, I'm like, oh, you mean there was there were a couple who bought a house and the dad had insomnia? That's a true story.
Yeah. Well, what they really mean is based on the accounts as told by a specific individual. You know what I mean? Like,
right, yeah.
It's their true story because in their perception, that's what they saw, but it's not like it actually happened. Yeah. By the way, and maybe that's what he meant by urban legends.
Yeah, right. By the way, Grizzly Manor is my cabin in the woods.
Yeah, different Grizzly. But
different manor.
But I mean, the long story short, whether it's true or not, they put it on the box.
Yeah.
So I think that's amazing. I didn't know that. And like as soon as I saw the cover before even starting, I was already intrigued. So.
Yeah. No, I mean I didn't see the cover of the box. I just saw it in the title screen. But you texted me. Based on a true story. I was out, and I came back and I had this text, and I was like, "Huh, what are you talking about?" And you're like, "It's on the cover." I'm like, "Wow, that's an interesting choice."
Well, the other thing I'll say too is that I think we'll talk about even in this episode some, but continue talking about. I think the tone the thing that I'm starting to already love about just even playing initially. And it's one of our topics for tonight, but to seed it a little bit here, the tone and like feel of the game, it's obviously very, Japanese horror in its approach, like we talked about The Ring or what have you, but it's got a obviously very campy and very like survival horror video game. It's like, it's not like whatever high fiction, but it's got an authenticity to it, like that for some reason that I can appreciate, like the whole thing about the author coming there. Like the pieces kind of add up, and I didn't put this for today. We'll talk about it more later. But the whole I put the note down. What's it called? Oh, the correlation screen. Have you seen that? Did you look at that?
I don't think I have.
Oh, you need to look at the correlation screen. There's a separate, very odd name. Like I don't know if correlation's the best localization for it, but so we'll talk about that next episode. But the fact that they have that there in the game is a very
it was a while before I realized that the triangle button was going to be a different menu from the pause menu.
So yeah, right. Exactly.
I was in it a while, and then like I finally am like, hey, wait a minute, I have some inventory. Because I've been picking things up.
Yeah, where is that?
You don't so much with her brother, right? He picks up the camera and some film, and I guess that's really it. He doesn't really get any inventory that he can't just use, right? Because he can immediately use the camera and the film, right? So it's like, oh, well, what, and then as you pick up like bits of evidence, you can just read them right then. And then after a while, I'm like, I must be able to go back and look at that stuff. And I finally, started to put it
so on that screen,
I had seen it on the controls, but I guess I just went into something specific in there. I'll have to go back and look. Yeah, I don't even remember that in the menu. Yeah,
there's a list of and I think when it I saw a description of it someplace. It might have been. I did actually look in the manual already because to be honest, I'm a little stuck. I think that the correlation screen, once you do look at it, is populated by reading the notes that you find.
Okay.
And so, it's kind of a red thread kind of screen.
Okay. Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
So it's interesting. But my point is, it adds a bit of authenticity, right? Because it's like it puts meaning, like kind of more tangible meaning to the people that are the stories about. Feels like a true story, kind of.
To call back to Ju-on, like one of the things I appreciate about that, that movie and kind of the series as a whole, but really, even just the first one, is like there's multiple things happening in one location, and they happen at different times.
It's very like that. It very much like that. Yeah, it feels like that.
Yeah, it's just like in a floor of a house or something like that, where all this is happening, 2 floors.
Yeah, it's a good movie. Yeah, I would like to watch it again.
Yeah, it's super creepy though. The noise that she makes is so the ghost makes is so good. Really good audio. Of course, is a key to. We'll probably talk about audio a different time. I'd like to have more of it before we talk about it on the cast. But
there's
audio is so key to horror for me.
We should. I think the music so far is good and ambient, and I think the audio, what little we've seen or heard, is there's been some moments where I've been pretty impressed by kind of the subtlety of it. But we'll talk about that more later.
Yeah, we should talk a little bit about sort of let's talk about what you called the pixel hunt, because I think that it kind of leads to another conversation about how they're leading you through this game. So, it's funny because I know exactly what you've missed based on your description of what you've seen. And my one thing that I would say about it is basically, if you are seeing ghosts, and you see this as the brother at the beginning, like you see things, the intention is, well, go towards that, which of course is not my natural reaction as a human.
Yeah.
If I see a ghost, that is the opposite of the direction I'm going. If I were to ever see a ghost, right? I mean, it would certainly open up my eyes on the possibilities of our universe, for one. But for two, that's not something I'm approaching. So, that's definitely a whole thing with it, is like, the idea is, of course, you're protected. You're holding this controller in your hand. The goal is to push the characters into the danger because that's what horror is, right? It's sort of like, I've also been playing Until Dawn, which I never played.
Oh, wow.
The Supermassive game. I think their first horror game. It wasn't their first game, but it was their first, like, in that style, in that anthology, Dark Pictures. And, it's a teens at a remote location.
Friday the 13th.
Yeah, it's Friday the 13th, or any number of things like that. And of course, the idea is like, well, yeah, you have to put them in danger. Like and you're making all these kind of choices along the way that you're kind of natural. Like,
it doesn't work if you don't.
If you don't what? Oh, if you don't push them towards the danger.
You can't do what we would do in real life, and that
exactly
like self-preservation.
What I was going to say is, what you have to do then is sort of like, I heard this description once of like a role-playing game is like, when you're making your characters, you have to be, the job of the player is to make your character so that it fits in the world that your DM is preparing for you, right? So you don't, like, if you're making a bunch of loners that won't work together, it's like, well, you failed as players because you're all going to have to work together, right? So, and so there's a sort of same thing going on here. Is, of course, you're not making the characters, but like, your actions have to kind of go with the theme, which is, these are people who are just going to be curious, and maybe we're seeing the world a little differently from how they are, and they're just kind of catching movement out of the corner of their eyes, even though we're seeing more, because often they're not looking in the direction of that thing happening. So my thing to you then is like, follow the ghosts, I guess.
Right?
Because there is some tutorialization that you haven't had yet, and it's because you haven't followed that ghost. So,
okay. I thought I did. I mean, I think I know where he went, but but no, I mean, eventually I'll find it. But my point about the pixel hunt of it, which I both appreciate. So to your point, like, they're using ghosts as their feedback and and guidance, right, for the player, which is very cohesive and focused, I will say. I mean, if you're making a game about ghosts, that does make a lot of sense. And some of the ghosts seem to be threatening, and some of them are like this, like, informational or ambient or jump scares. There's been a lot of great. I think they've already done what
some of them fulfill multiple roles. So
and I think that there's been a lot of those great ghost moments where it's like they're there and then they're not, or you see one in a mirror behind you and then they're not there, like. And they're using camera framing really well to reveal some of that stuff. So I'm really impressed so far with the attention to detail, and again, using ghosts versus zombies, or horror, like more like gruesome horror, like Resident Evil and Silent Hill. And Silent Hill had a little bit more ghost stuff going on, I feel like, but it's just such a refreshing change. But the pixel hunt part is like, as I've talked about, we both talk about from time to time, I hate missing stuff.
Yeah.
Because I want to read everything, et cetera, et cetera. And there's been like a chest of drawers that I thought I actually did look in. And then I came back around because I was just looking for stuff. And then I realized.
Yeah, the clue I gave you on that is not a clue, because I thought you were talking about a different one. So, so you don't. I don't read anything into what I said about it. Yeah, but they basically have lots of.
There was a journal, for instance, right, that I really wanted to read, and I thought I had, because they don't give you any feedback on. Right. They don't give you any input feedback, right? Whether it's something that will get a description if you look at it and hit interact, or whether you can search it with interact. You just have to kind of, just like you would in a adventure game, you have to kind of like scroll around,
walk the character around,
and just tap it a lot. Make sure you're looking and they do have some visual language when it comes to like, okay, that's a chest of drawers. That looks like an important object. I can get at least a written line about. Maybe there's something in it. But there's been a couple times when I feel like I'm just not angled the right way,
Yeah,
and I just
it
miss
does
the
happen.
interact.
Yep.
So
Yeah, and they do signal important items with
yeah, they have a
interaction
little
prompts, but things
gem.
that are thematic are just are just in the world, so yeah, you can definitely miss stuff, although I don't think a lot of stuff.
They have, yeah, and they have obviously the critical items are twinkling. They have
Right.
that gem which only the brother had, I think. Or maybe I don't remember if she has it. I feel like, but anyway, there's like a gem that changes colors on the HUD, that shows clues versus ghosts
Hmm.
nearby. The rumble is very effective, I think, for me at least, both heartbeats and when you're near clues or
Yep.
ghosts.
Yep.
So yeah, they're using all the tools in their toolbox for sure. And I'm sure I'll learn it. The controls we'll talk about probably another time, but I actually want to fool with all the different controller layouts. They have like A through
Oh,
H.
you're always. Uh, I'm a whatever the default is. That's how everybody played it.
Yeah, well, when you're in camera mode, they have movement and camera from a first person perspective swapped.
Right.
And so I'd like to see if they have one that is, swapped to what more modern would have. I will teach myself if I stick with the default, but I want to
The
see.
way that I sort of justified that in my mind was that um, because you don't have control of the camera in third person mode, like you can't we can actually talk a little bit about the camera, the game's camera, not the in-game camera, which is confusing, I realize. But my mind just was like, oh yeah, that's fine. Like how I'm in this mode where the right stick controls where I'm looking.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why that just worked for me,
Well, no, I
or
think
rather, the right stick controls where I'm moving, rather.
yeah.
And I don't know why that worked, but I do. One of the things I will say, kind of, we've referred to Silent Hill 2 and Resident Evil. One of the things I really, really like about this, in terms of how the character moves in the environment, and and I'm not talking about controls yet, but the way the cameras move, I think the camera placement and the sort of different movements that they have for the cameras are actually really, really good. For example, in that room where there's a staircase up, which is like the third room, there's a camera that basically is on a line in the middle of the room, and it just flips if you go on the other side of that line. So it's basically, it divides the room in two. There's a thing in the middle of the room that you can't walk over, so you already can't walk down where the camera would be, and it just feels really, really natural. The way that the camera moves, it sort of reminds me of Until Dawn, which has a sort of similar, like the camera is on placed locations or placed paths, and you're still controlling the character, and the character's trying to act reasonably, right, in the space.
Mm.
And in Until Dawn, it sometimes doesn't work because the fidelity is so high, and they're trying to do so much. Like a character will kind of turn awkwardly because they can walk in more spaces. Here, they're actually constraining the character really, really well, I feel. And then the camera also, doesn't have to do much work. It just feels really, really meticulous
Mm-hmm.
to me. And they're still getting their Dutch angles, and the part about the character that I really, really appreciated, and this is not something I've seen in the other horror games, is that in certain places they basically lock you into a specific direction, so that walking up the stairs, for example, will look really good. Like the feet will match and all that stuff. And you're on a line. You can't walk diagonally up the stairs. Like you can't move left and right when you're on the stairs. You're just going up or down the stairs. And it's like, yes, we should do this more, because
Yeah.
it just looks good. Nobody cares. It's like you're basically entering a piece of furniture, as we would refer to it in like a Skyrim or whatever. It's like you're just doing the animation for the thing. It's like, well, okay, you're going up the stairs. You can actually enter multiple points on the stairs, but then you're just up and down the stairs. Like there's no, I want to turn around on the stairs. I mean, you can come back down, but you can't like turn 45 degrees and walk diagonally up the stairs or down or whatever. I just was like, it just makes it all kind of just feel okay. It's like, okay, this is fine. Like, I was worried, especially with like a Resident Evil where the controls are hard because of the tank controls and the fixed camera. This is just like the camera moves. It feels natural. When you enter things that kind of only have one affordance, or two affordances up and down, I guess, it just feels natural. And like, this is how people walk upstairs, and let's not overthink it. I just appreciate all that simplicity.
Yeah. You just mentioned it there when you brought up Resident Evil. What I was going to say is that, one thing that I predict will be a takeaway for us already, that I will predict already, is that when it comes to innovation in this very specific genre, one thing I'm already surprised by, to your point, is the difference between a Resident Evil type camera and character controls versus this, in that I don't want to say that, and I guess, I don't know, maybe Resident Evil 2 or even 3 might have been out by this point. So they probably have improved and iterated on from there. I don't remember from the original 2 and 3. But like, we talked about it when we played Resident Evil, the tank controls and the camera placement in any given room was always strained, and just like first implementation of the concept, I feel like, right? It was like, it's super innovative at the time, and like, oh, isn't this cool? And we forgot to mention Alone in the Dark. That's a game we still haven't played, but Alone in the Dark was probably ahead of that as far as like that kind of motif of camera and character control. But this one, to your point, I feel like they're like, okay, not that we know that they said this, but I'll pretend they did. That, to them, they're like, okay, we like Resident Evil, we like Silent Hill, we're going to make a competitor. What's the thing we're going to do better? Okay, we're going to figure out camera and character control combinations and how that works better for a much more cinematic and smoothly authored experience. I think that I think constantly we're going to be saying, even walking down that simple hallway after the first room with the ropes in it,
right.
It's not awkward like it often in those rooms. Those hallways are often awkward in Resident Evil, where you're like, which way do I stick?
Yeah, how do I push
stick?
Yeah, and
I'm
like, walking into or how far can I have to turn myself left and right, and then push the button to walk, because he didn't even have the shoulder buttons originally, right? Because it was a PlayStation 1 game. I just think that you didn't have the sticks. You didn't have the sticks.
Yeah, you didn't have the sticks originally. Yeah, but it just seems like the attention to detail, and that they really did choose to focus on this aspect, which, when you're making this kind of game, that's a thing you do spend your money on. You're like, okay, we need to crack this nut, because our competitors have not done it perfectly yet. Well, nobody's done it perfectly, but they haven't. They could use an improvement.
Yeah.
And it's also a very cinematic game so far. It seems like a cinematic story, so you'd want to place your bets in this area. So far it's impressive. I'm wondering, as we talk about camera stuff so much, if we need to make a rule for this series where if we say camera obscura.
Oh, yes, of course.
We're talking about the physical,
the one that the
actual camera
character uses,
because the gameplay camera is going to be coming up a lot, I think.
Yeah,
it's like, we'll just say camera. But
that is very true. Yeah, the CO, which is
the CO. Okay, sure. Yeah. Let's call it the CO. Camera obscura every time is ridiculous.
It's a lot. Do you want to touch on any of these other? We've touched a little bit on the style and tone. Did you have anything more you wanted to talk about there, or do you think we've covered it?
Well, no, I think we've covered it for now. I think I just to reiterate it, it's
we'll be
just,
returning to it, I think.
oh, for sure. It's just even in the opening moments, it's like I'm trying to think back of Resident Evil, the first few zombie encounters. You just immediately know that this is something refreshing and different, right?
Yeah.
There is the ghost you quote unquote damage, the first ghost you damage up on that upper landing, where they're teaching you about the camera obscura stuff, but pacing wise, because you see ghosts, you see glimpses, there's a little jump scares and those little kind of like, did I just see that kind of moments throughout the whole opening sections in both characters sections. But they're still economical. They're still like elegantly done. And the pacing in Resident Evil is much more kind of like, when's my next zombie?
Yeah.
Is that zombie on the floor going to get up and get me?
Yeah.
And scare me? Or is it already dead? Do I shoot it while it's on the ground? First of all, you don't have a gun in this game.
Yeah, right.
So they have different tools that they have to employ. And I'm just very appreciative of how different it feels tonally, even though I'm scared. When you take away something like weapons from, even though the camera obscura is kind of a weapon, when you take away weapons on traditional weapons from the character, of course that's going to change your anxiety, right, over how scary something's going to be. And then you have these jump scares. So I don't know. I'm glad we're playing it, because it is just a nice, different one of these games that I just was surprised at how different it's feeling so far.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel the same way. I mean, the other thing is that the characters are presented in this kind of soft light as well, that is kind of naturally ghostly itself, which is just really, it looks really, really nice. And there's this these like little cuts to like little cutscenes do a lot of character work as well, which we'll definitely touch on a lot more, because we'll see a lot more of it going forward. And I love that stuff too, because it, a lot of these sort of Japanese horror tropes, will rely on sort of character tropes as well, both of the protagonist or the ghost or whatever, and or ghosts, and so here you've got, she's not a schoolgirl, but she's definitely playing on that, like innocence and things like that. And they've got this, people who are researching these things that happened, and a novelist who's like, who knows what his deal is. Like, there's a lot of stuff in there that is very rich, especially I think to a Western audience, maybe not super well versed in Japanese horror, at the time. It's certainly more available to us now, but at the time I feel like it was one of those things you really had to go and seek out in 2001, in a way that streaming and things like that have made these things a lot more available today. So
I think the less is more approach, in the sort of like, so far at least, they're not, one of the both blessings and curses of Resident Evil is that they do over explain most things. Right there, it's except for the first one, when you really weren't sure what this, what this franchise was going to be, and of course it's kind of a joke at this point how far it's gone in the lore direction. But so far, at least, it's like there's just the very much the less is more, because you need that in a ghost story. You can't just have the ghost show up and give you exposition.
Right.
You need to be like, there needs to be one breadcrumb, and then you're like, what did that mean? What did that mean?
Yeah.
And so I hope that they stick with that, and it doesn't get too, I'm a little bit worried about the ritual stuff showing up so quickly, and but hopefully they don't hit you over the head.
Yeah, we'll see where that goes. I mean, I've seen a little bit more than you. I think there's a lot of interesting avenues of storytelling already, from some stuff that is just beyond where you are. And, I also hope they're not making a Jenga tower out of breadcrumbs that crumbles easily. But I I feel, this feels remarkably sure-footed from the outset to me, which I
Yeah,
didn't
they know what
really,
they're doing.
I didn't really expect. I didn't know what to expect because, this is a series I've never. I guess I played a little bit of like 4 or 5. It was a free one on PlayStation Plus, but it was like in 12 parts, and like I didn't really know what it was about. It was like they were trying something episodic or something, and I like, wait a minute, I have to download 12 different parts. Like, why is this? So it didn't last long with me. Because the pacing felt really weird as well because it was episodic. So I don't know which one that was. Don't at me. But yeah, it is a really pleasant surprise. So. All right, well, let's put a pin in it there for Fatal Frame. We will come back again next week with our Cameras Obscura, and we may it'll kind of depend on how much time we have for playing through it, so we'll see if we get 3 or 4 this time on this series. It feels like a not super long game, but of course we only did an hour this first time, so we'll see how it goes. We should hit at least a couple emails. We have 2 long ones that I think we'll skip, but I think I have a short one and you have a relatively short one, your first one there. Because the second one I sent you was continuation of my first. So go ahead and read me that one from Sam. These were sent to devgameclub@gmail.com.
Okay. Yeah, so I was just looking up Time to Beat just to get a sense of it.
Yeah, I think it's like 7.5 to 10.5, depending on how much.
Yeah. Okay, save states are no silver bullet.
Oh, I definitely wanted to hit this because it touches on horror. So
okay, that's the one you want me to read?
That's the one.
Okay, from Sam. When a recent listener wrote to you about save states, I was surprised how quickly you turned to give the player what they want. Oh boy, here we go. While save states can be a godsend, just as often they detract from the experience and cause players to miss the fun. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm probably going to end up agreeing with him on this. But in a horror game, save states remove all tension. I hope we play Dead Rising someday. Because it just got a remaster. Yes. In a platformer, they interrupt flow and fundamentals. There's a sense of growing mastery that comes from repetition. I.e. Mega Man. Heavy save states are like seeing the game. Heavy save states are like seeing the game without playing the game. Better accomplished watching YouTube, I think, he says. And I often do watch things instead of playing them. For years, I had a hard time saying no when these features were present. Using quick save after every challenge and quick load after every mistake in a game like Half-Life or Baldur's Gate is miserable. Hitman's best moments come from playing after blowing the mission, so-called knucklehead stealth. That's what they call it. Somebody calls it that. And maybe worst of all, these features can make a game just plain boring. I would save state through Castlevania 4 and think, wow, this isn't fun at all. This will be an interesting conversation because I agree and disagree. But anyway, but we must consider accessibility. Player abilities vary wildly, and some players will have only one hand, no hands, or no sight. They ought to be able to enjoy your game, even if they cannot finish the whole thing. So like everything, context matters. I don't think every game having all of the cheating tools is the solution. That's a band-aid. Game makers must thoughtfully consider the experience goals, accessibility, and the game type, and then supply the right tools for players. Tunic is a great example. There is challenging combat with no-fail accessibility option. With a no-fail accessibility option. I turned this on and never regretted it because this game is much more about exploration, vibe, and puzzles. Save states wouldn't improve Tunic's thoughtful design. He has a lot of definitive statements in this email. Mm-hmm. Arcade design is often brilliant. Unlimited spawns, credits. Let any player finish the game. No matter the ability, players can improve by finishing it again with fewer credits. Modern packages give you unlimited credits and provide cheat features useful for practice, but these things prevent you from making the leaderboards. It's a nice combination of access for all while still preserving what makes the game fun. Sam.
Okay. So it's can open, worms everywhere. I've sort of two minds. I mean, one thing is I think that, for games that were designed that did not know that they were someday going to have, save states supporting
Mega
their
Man.
play. Yeah, Mega Man. I mean, I played that game liberally with save states, believe me, and I still didn't beat it. So yes, like I get it, but I think we're now at a point where it's like, well, okay, but now anybody could basically anticipate that someday it's going to be possible to do that. I actually don't feel that a horror game does lose all tension for me. Like Alien Isolation, for example, probably the scariest game I've played, and also PT. So those are two good examples as far as horror goes for me, where it's like, well, PT is basically a save state because you're just doing the same, 50 feet of hallway again and again, or 100 feet or whatever it is. So it's like, it's the same thing.
It was designed that way, right?
It is designed that way over and over again. You're in the same place.
Yeah.
And how it iterates, in that space is the point. Would say, I don't think save states would actually change the tension for me, but I actually don't think it would matter. It's a repeating experience anyway, so it kind of is like you're save stating it.
Yeah,
it's kind of my point.
But it was
right?
concepted with that.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it's meant to be, is this repeated thing. And then the other one with Alien Isolation, the thing that really gets me, of course, is the audio design. I think is fantastic and is what gets me more than anything else in that game. And at the end, when I was dying a ton, and like replaying sections again and again and again, pretty much like replaying from a save state. I'm just replaying from where I last, literally saved, and not just rewinding and getting through stuff. I really wanted them because even though I was having the horror, the thing that was sapping the horror for me of the alien was that, oh, I just did this 15 times.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well,
a double-edged sword.
Yeah. I mean, so it's like, well, it probably would have been more effective for me if I could have gotten through it in fewer iterations. Right. So
yeah,
I don't know. That was the one that I reacted to mostly because we're focusing on horror. Was like, oh yeah, well, sorry, like I don't feel that way, that they lose the tension.
Yeah, and I'm it's hard on these emails because we don't get to have the conversation with the
of course
the writer, Sam, specifically. But as an example, when I mean, I don't want to like refute his points, but I guess I'll just try to be diplomatic and respond, because I do generally agree with what he's saying in concept, but and I understand what he's trying to say, and I definitely give it good kudos on his argument. But with his Tunic, the irony, I think, for me, is that with his Tunic example, he gave an example of a place where for him it did work.
States would have helped.
There was a option that
he basically turned it off. But I mean,
that was give the player an option to do this thing, and for him it was
give them what they want.
Because in his opinion, that game is about exploration, vibe, and puzzles. But in somebody else's opinion, that may not be the case.
I did not play with that accessibility option on, even though I knew it was there. Yeah,
exactly. So you just have to. I guess my point about that example that he put in with Tunic is that one of the challenging things about this for game developers, and I mean, throw out the whole thing of like games that didn't intend to have save states have them now. It's like, okay, sure, whatever, but that's neither here nor there. But for games that are putting accessibility options in, like this or Celeste or something like that, you have to think of a wide range of players, not just specific players who you think are going to vibe with a specific part of the game. You know what I mean? You have to think of like a. So anyway, it's really good. It's a good email, and I think his points about like when games shine without some of these shortcut features, totally agree with him. I still land, and we're biased because we're maybe developers or something, but I still land with maybe give the player what they want. We said incorrectly. I'll give him this one. I'll give him this. I'll throw him this bone. Sorry, Sam. Is that it's maybe not as much give the player what they want, but because most of the time they're not sure. Once they start a game, they don't know what they want exactly, right? They're just getting to know the game. But just give them lots of options and opportunities to discover how they want to play, and don't get in the way of that. That's kind of where I'm coming from. It's like they're not starting the game and saying I want this or I want save states in every game. I don't. If that's what we said when we talked about it before, then I agree with you, Sam. That's not good. But give them, to your really excellent point, Sam. It's like, the games that think about the right options and the right, especially accessibility features for that game, is, I think, a frontier right now for game making in a really positive way. So I appreciate you bringing that up. But still, fundamentally, it's a player's choice. You don't have to use save states if you don't want to. If they're there, sure. For us, we have another additional problem in that we're playing for the podcast. So we lean, if they're there, we often do lean on them too much. And I agree with you. See last episode when we talked about Kaon's interview episode, save states definitely impacted my appreciation for Mega Man, because that game is about mastery, and save states will remove that. And to your point about Alien Isolation, really, I totally agree with you. An excellent point about like it can go too far, because what happens in Alien for me, because I'm actually hypothetically playing that right now, even though I've taken a break.
A long break.
Yeah, a long break, but I'm near the end, I think, and I've played a lot of hours of it.
Yeah.
But I have a hard time motivating myself to go back to it.
Yeah.
Because of where I am. I'm actually...
It's the most anxiety producing game.
Yeah, I'm in a section...
That and PT. I played PT in broad daylight with the windows open and the lights on, and was still had moments of pure terror. And in fact, just walking around, I mean, I'm very susceptible both to jump scares and to audio. And that game has both of those. The audio is excellent, and I mentioned that already about Alien. The thing is that it's funny because Celeste is like a game that I've heard about lauded as like one of those games that has just pitch perfect platforming and all of that, but it's also at the same time like the accessibility advocates game because it has so many accessibility options. And I'm like, I know I probably can't do the precise platforming anymore. Like, I just know that is true of me. So, for me, I'm like, yeah, more accessibility options, please, because I'm going to be aging out of, games like that I might enjoy. If they just had a little bit more support for my poor crab hands, so. Yeah,
it's just, I think, I don't want to oversimplify it, but it just comes down to options, right? I mean, to his point about save states specifically, if you look at it from Nintendo's perspective, there's a business model involved, and they can put save states into these older games because, as you've described, how the sort of like emulation side of it can work and just kind of just capture the whole game, blah, 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 because we have the memory, etc. So it's like, I don't know, why not? You don't have to use it. Yeah. So because it's not forced upon you, in fact, a lot of people don't even realize it's there often because it is kind of it's a firmware or whatever. It's a OS kind of thing.
I think it was on the SNES Mini, and I didn't know it was there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's very. I think
for some games, for something they played on it, and didn't know, and I might have even been streaming, and somebody was like, you could just rewind. I was like, what?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think even on that device specifically, it's fairly accessible to get to as well, right? It's like a button.
It's literally buttons. And when somebody told me about it, I think I accidentally hit the reset instead. So it was like a double whammy.
Yeah, but with Alien, like you're totally right in that with horror specifically, you really have to be careful about the balancing of that, because what ends up happening in Alien when you get to when you hit those wall missions or moments is that because you've played a section so much, you start seeing behind the curtain too much, and you're like, okay, this is how they're doing this. This is how they're faking me out. So I'm just, in order to get through this section, I'm going to have to memorize things. I'm going to have, and they do have some procedural aspects to the AI there, but you basically start understanding too much of the smoke and mirrors, which you don't want in a horror game.
Yeah, last thing.
But that being said, I think that it is really the save system in that game, just like in something like Dead Rising, is albeit those are bathrooms, which is an added extra hilarity. Is to his point critical to enjoyment of that game. I would use regular save system in that game if they had it, because I'm a monster. Mm-hmm. But I do think I would enjoy the game less. I just, to your point, there's some sections
it happens
that
to you
are
with
just
Far Cry 2, right? I mean,
oh yeah, right. That's a good example.
You had the inferior Far Cry 2 experience, certainly from Clint's point of view, because of the save anywhere. And even when we talked about it on the cast, I look back on that now of like, I'm surprised they did not pick up on that. When I don't know why
we were talking about it.
Yeah, well, it just came up, and I was like, "What do you mean you saved anywhere?" It's because I was like, "You only get to save in the save houses."
Yeah, I mean, I just did it kind of naturally.
It very much changed your experience, and I get that, right? You didn't even know that was happening. Is the unfortunate thing there is that it was like
it wasn't a choice. Yeah,
it was just a platform thing, right? And
yeah, I was like, oh, I can save in these huts as well. Oh, why would I do that? I'm just going to save. It's like it didn't dawn on me that was added later. So, but that's also good. Okay, we've spent a lot of time in this email, but it's a great email, Sam. So thank you. The funny thing about that's also a great example for the other part of this, or the other side of the coin here, is that if I ever do go back and play that game, I will choose not to use the save anywhere. Yeah. I will choose to go and use the huts. And that is my, that as a player, that is, I think, a great option for the PC version.
And on that point, there was, I'm sure we mentioned it on that series, but that Ben, I can't remember Ben's last name. He's a researcher in Australia, or was at that time as a grad student. No, not somebody who listens to the cast, though. Somebody from the blogosphere, who did a long write-up of playing a permadeath Far Cry 2 run.
Oh yeah, you've mentioned him before. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what that was like. And he wrote it up, and it was long. It was like 80 pages or something like that, of all the things that happened. There was screenshots in it and everything, but still it was quite long, and detailed, and how that changed the experience. So, it's possible to turn the dials to make the experience that you want in both directions. And I guess what we're saying is it's often possible to make the game harder for yourself, but not easier for yourself. And you still might want it to be easier for yourself. So, save states are a way to do it systemically. So that's why I would kind of support them, because it's just there. And once you know, right. But my tendency would not be to immediately do that. I tend to only do it because time pressure for the cast is usually the one.
Yeah. And reviewers talk about the same problem. I mean, to Sam's point about how the pod, like, say, let alone, separate from save state specifically, even though that's the tool that we use sometimes for the podcast itself impacts our enjoyment of the game sometimes, because we are on a schedule. And reviewers talk about that all the time, right? Where they're like, I'm on deadline. I have to play this game in a weekend. Yeah. It's 100 hours, which is obviously impossible, but it's, it's whatever, 40 hours. Your experience with that game is going to be very different than a player's game, a player's experience. And that's unfortunate. I brought up Dead Rising.
Call that out,
So. Yeah. And they do, the good ones will definitely mention that, but I bring up Dead Rising on this topic specifically because the remaster came out or is coming out soon, and I actually do that game. The original game is I do like a lot. I actually do like that series, but I'm fearful, like Sam is fearful, that the remaster is going to basically give you save anywhere.
Yeah, sand down the system. Yeah.
And it's going to change. It's going to change the way the game feels for most people because they will just use that. And getting
that said, I never got past that psychotic clown on the Ferris wheel, or roller coaster or whatever it was.
Yeah, I don't remember the specifics. I remember the clown generally, but the boss's characters in those that was good. But specifically that the concept of having, they had the weird timer thing for saving people, which was, I think, another innovation, but also very frustrating for people.
Yeah,
because you can't save everybody.
Yep.
But
quickly learned it.
But similar, but there's the roguelike aspects of it too, which I think was really cool. But I don't know. I think that game is really an underappreciated game. But the tension, like Alien, of getting from one bathroom to another in a horde like that at the time was very special, I think. So, but they'll sand it down, just like Sam says.
Yeah, probably.
But if they give you the option,
I was going to say they probably will give you the option.
Then I'm okay with that.
They might even give you an achievement, so that it'll kind of push people in that.
Ooh, even better.
Yeah. And which is what like they did for Grim Fandango for the tank controls, because the original game had tank controls and it wasn't great. And
they have an achievement to play with tank controls?
Yeah, it's like the way it was meant to be played.
Hilarious.
Yeah, so
that's like almost griefing the player.
If you play the whole game the way it was designed, it's called the way it was meant to be played. All right, I'm going to do one here that's pretty quick because I think there's actually not a question, but we did ask for folks, and Father Beast will get back to you because you've got a massive 2-part email about Heroes of Might and Magic. So more on that later. Anyway, the subject is fun game boxes. It's from Dave K. He says, "G'day, guys. The email in your last episode about big, impressive game boxes had me notice the Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast tin box I have in my garage. This is currently used to store paint for my miniatures, a hobby I'll get back to one of these decades. The front of the box has a sticker that proudly proclaims it contains a t-shirt and poster, and while the t-shirt long ago fell into rags due to much love, and the poster sits in a box somewhere still in my possession for some reason, the mighty tin box reminds me of a time where boy bands roamed the earth and big boxes reigned supreme. I still have a Half-Life 2 t-shirt in regular rotation 2 decades later, so that must have been a similar story. I miss the maps and chunky manuals, but in a world of day one patches and with myself being a grown-up with storage concerns, maybe it's for the best that digital distribution has seen an end of them. Thanks once again to your podcast for stirring up memories of years gone by. You are genuinely putting good out into the world with what you do. Cheers, Dave K." Thank you, Dave K. I thought that was funny. I actually have somewhere in this house a couple of Jedi Starfighter paraphernalia. So one is, and I've been meaning to like do something with them. One is, I don't know if you remember some giveaway we had like a Puck t-shirt, like it was shaped in the
I had that for a long time. I got rid of it, but
I think I still have it because I still have everything. And then the other thing is I have a stack of like 3 or 4 of the iron-on patches for or they weren't patches, just the iron-on, I don't know, logo for Starfighter. I don't know if you remember, we did those too, where you just iron a thing onto a t-shirt,
right?
Also have that.
Well, we didn't, to his point, the metal box, tin box, whatever. I remember that one because I was there when. That game was made by Raven, but I remember when
we published it.
Got the game, we didn't even touch on collector's editions and that sort of like trend and they're still kind of around, but they become even digital too.
I have a big Skyrim one. It's enormous, and it's I'm just looking, like I look at it. It's in my basement, so I see it's behind me while I work, and I'm thinking someday I have to throw that away. Like, I'm just putting it off. Like, I don't know what else I'm going to do with it.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and one of the only, I haven't saved, I have some of the ones on my shelf behind me now boxes that I've saved. I think the only collector's edition that I just cannot part ways with. Gosh, do I still have? Maybe I did part ways with it. I think I still have it in storage. Is I have the original collector's edition for World of Warcraft, which is an enormous,
I remember
tome.
That.
It looks like a tome kind of book.
Yeah.
Very proud that I still have that, and came with an art book inside and all that kind of stuff. So there's that sort of era too. But as far as collector's edition goes, I still think one of the most infamous ones is Halo, is the cat helmet from Halo 3. That is little, they call it the cat helmet because it's a Master Chief helmet that the game came in. I think the game was inside of it. And of course, around 343, all the, Uber fans who were working on the game had it on their shelf, but it wasn't big enough for anyone to put on. So
people would put it on their cats, right?
It was perfect for a cat, but it was, not big enough for a human, but it very, very faithful replica of his helmet. But that's kind of an infamous collector's edition, like hypothetical, technically a box, but also just a statue.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for those emails. Like I said, we've got a couple more, but we always like to have them again at devgameclub@gmail.com. We also love to have your reviews. Yada, yada. I'm not going to go over it again. We're all over an hour and 20 minutes. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com, and you can find my co-host streaming sometimes. There's a counter for it on our Discord at twitch.tv/
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
As I mentioned, that Discord has a link in our show notes. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo, the Discord merch store, all by Mark Garcia. Thanks so much, Mark, for all you do. Have fun exposing things people can't see with your camera this week, and good night.
Good night.